Welcome to the Wake Up Now podcast with Darneal Johnson III. Experience interviews with a range of guests from various fields, such as entertainment, spirituality, social justice, economics, business, media, education, and much more. Here's Darneal.
Cherice Flowers is a young, brilliant mind, a mom. She is a woman of God. She is a friend to many. And I am so delighted that she is one, her and her family are one, who I say they made pastoring very easy for me. They were very supportive, prayed, encouraged, gave, strengthened, give, strengthened, still very supportive. So when this hot button came up that I'll introduce in a minute, I thought, no better person, a woman of color, a woman of God, a legal mind, an attorney, a mother, a wife. There's no better bill that can be fit to discuss this issue of Roe versus Wade other than Attorney Cherice Flowers. Attorney, welcome to the Wake Up Now podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bishop. It's an honor to be here. I am excited. We've been in discussion about this for a while, and so I'm excited to finally make it onto the podcast and to be able to, engage in this wonderful discussion with you today.
Absolutely. Before we get started, how is your family doing and your wonderful, lovely, happy daughter?
My family is doing awesome. My husband is doing well. And my daughter, she's about to be 4. She is full of energy. She is excited. We're expanding our family. So she's just telling everybody she's a big sister. And we shall see how everything works out in the next couple of months on if that excitement stays.
Yes, it will, even though she may not get as much attention as she was used to getting, but it will. She'll be excited to be. And so congratulations and God bless you and your family. The title of this podcast is The Vote That Shook the World. The Vote That Shook the World. Before we get into dialogue, in case you've been living under a rock, let me go to a little background. On Friday, June the 24th of 2022, the Supreme Court of America made a landmark, probably historic decision to overturn a law that I believe was put in place in 1973, and that is without prejudice or discrimination, that women had a legal right to seek abortions in America. Well, of course, as you and I know, that has been a hot button for several years in particular. And when namely 45 was elected president and began to appoint some of the Supreme Court justices, it was intentional that several of them would be a part of what happened on Friday, June 24th, 2022. Now, because this case, in my opinion, because I don't do law, is so complex, there's so many loose ends, I have brought, I believe, one of the greatest current young legal minds on the Wake Up Now podcast to discuss this matter, and perhaps, if not everything, to help us kind of unravel some of these pieces. So before we get started to the details, attorney, and that's what I'll reference you by with all due respect, what was your single thought when you first heard the announcement? And I'm going to go back to what they do. Do you remember where you were? Do you remember where you were and what you were doing? But most importantly, what were your thoughts when you first heard that Roe versus Wade had been overturned?
Yeah, I don't remember where I was, but the interesting thing this was such a landmark decision that we also had a historic event happen where the information was leaked. You know, usually
Yes.
we don't find out what the Supreme Court decided until they release the decision. But this information was leaked early, which also caused the uproar about, should that be happening, about the integrity of the court. Um, so it was, there were already rumblings that the court was already going to overturn it before we knew officially. And when I heard the rumors, I was just it was not a happy day. And so by the time the decision was actually released, I had wrapped my head around it, and I was expecting it at that point. Um, but this is a case that we will talk about for the ages. When we still talk about Brown versus Board to this day, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, and this will be the same, where anytime you bring up any historical case, any case where you have to study American history, this will be one of them.
Before we go further, and I should have done this in the introduction because I always like to solidify our guests' credentials, talk a little bit about your journey through law school, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Sure. So I first attended University of Maryland, College Park for my bachelor's. I have a bachelor's in sociology and criminology and criminal justice. And then I attended the University of Virginia School of Law. And I received my Juris Doctorate degree from there. And so Bishop, you were there with me when I was in law school. You prayed with me, and I'm the attorney I am today because of your prayers,
And
which
you put
which
in the
got me
work,
there.
attorney. Attorney, you put in the
Yes,
work. You put in. I remember that you were like, I was like, you got this. You got this. And in case anybody is under any illusion, it is a lot of work. That's why I honor attorneys. I have friends that are attorney. The recent Baltimore City state's attorney is a friend of mine, and that's why, as close as we always say, attorney Bates, because when you've put in the work, you deserve the title attorney. And so I just know that greater things, I don't want to stop prophesying on here, but greater things in your legal work are ahead. Do you care to share? Do you have any greater aspirations in your legal work? I know you're with child now, but when your child is born and kind of grown, you have any other legal aspirations? You want to be Attorney General of the United States of America or something like that?
no, I don't have any aspirations to be attorney general. I love working one on one with people. That is just like my passion. I love working with families. I love working with children. I had that as my goal when I entered law school, and so that kind of separated me from my peers at University of Virginia, because that's a law school where a lot of people like to go to big firms. Um, and so I just even in law school, I did a child advocacy clinic. I worked with juveniles that were detained and helped them with their rights. I did a health clinic where I
Wow.
did trust in the states law, and also elder rights, and also working on protecting the rights of women who were in prison in Virginia.
Wow.
So that's just I've always been one to want to fight for the little guy, and so that's really what Pat gave me the passion to go to law school. And after law school, I began my career at a nonprofit representing children in court and Senate cases, and that stands for Child in Need of Assistance. And those are cases where there are allegations of abuse and neglect against the child. Um, and so I represented children from the age of newborn all the way to 21. And currently, I'm practicing trust and estates law, but I just have a joy of learning new areas of law and expanding different ways that I can help families in our community. I've done expungements because I really feel like that is
Wow.
something we really need in our community, to give people a second chance and to give them the opportunities that they deserve, to not let charges that you've had and haven't been convicted of hold you back. So I can't say exactly where my career will go. I'm right now I'm entertaining learning different areas of law. As I do trust in the states, it's involving some tax law. I have a interest in disability law, so we will see. But it's always about helping the little guy and making sure that, we can fight against Goliath.
This is what the kingdom is about. And again, you taking us in a whole nother healthy area. Advocacy. I hear advocacy. And there's so many people, as you know, that they need legal representation, but it 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 can be expensive. And
Yes.
and I mean, there are people that you and I know that really, if they had the money, they wouldn't be sitting in jail. They would have been out of jail or waiting a trial or charges dropped. So I want to applaud you because as long as I've known you, I never knew your law career went that deep. We would have talked a long time ago. And I want to say thank you for taking up the banner to say, for me, it's not just about a career and just about how much I can get, but helping to make the life of those who can't necessarily represent themselves, especially our children, our the hearts of our children. So yeah, we're gonna have to get you back in another vein because I can already see, and yeah, this is something that you're, especially when you're talking about expungements. Do you know how many of our community are locked out? Not just ours, so I shouldn't say that, but do you know how many people in the community are locked out of? They've been rehabilitated, they have served their time, but again, when it comes to expungement, they don't know the kind of attorney that can kind of, get it done, make sure it's pushed through. So, y'all, this is who we have on the Wake Up Podcast now. And I can already tell you, because of the vein it's going in, that we're going to come back talking about some social justice issues. And if people need to contact you, because I think that is very important, how is there a particular way that a person could contact you?
If anybody wants to contact me, email is the best form. I can be contacted by email at lawson.cherice@gmail.com. That's LAWSON CHERICE@gmail.com.
Wow, powerful. All right, to this abortion thing, because we that's how we do. We flow. But your career is very sainted and very divinely orchestrated, especially in a time like this.
And this case is so appropriate because when we think about who this case is really going to impact, it's going to truly impact women who lack financial resources. And that's what the dissent talks about. Like, for people of certain financial means, it may not make that much of a difference.
Hmm.
But for somebody living paycheck to paycheck who doesn't have funds to travel across state lines and so forth, this is truly life changing.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Speaking of life changing, I wanted to read a statement and then get your thoughts. And so I was looking at the NPR report, and it said, in a historic and far reaching decision, the U.S. Supreme Court officially reversed Roe versus Wade, declaring that the constitutional right to abortion, upheld for nearly a half a century, no longer exists. Here's the question that I have for you and have been having. In order, because this says the U.S. officially reversed a historic constitutional right, why was it that this case did not have to go before Congress before it was overturned if it was in a constitutional right and the Supreme Court on its own could overturn it? Because I was thinking, along with some others when we were talking, that anytime you talk about something being constitutional, like the legalization of drugs federally, has to go before the Congress to be legalized in America. States can do it, but I'm talking about in America. Why didn't this go before Congress, attorney?
So when it comes to the Supreme Court actually makes decisions based on constitutional law. So those are the cases that they're going to hear, whether it's either about a right that's in the Constitution or about matters that are federal law is, across state lines. And so this appropriately went to the Supreme Court because we don't want to have situations where the court in California, when it comes to our constitutional rights, where the court in California is saying one thing and a court in Mississippi is saying something different. In this case, it actually takes place in Mississippi. And so when different circuit courts come to different decisions on our constitutional rights, the cases go up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to decide what's the rule, one and all, for the entire United States. Um, but it's interesting you mentioned Congress because that is what the majority reasoning is. The majority stated in their reasoning that they felt like Roe v. Wade overstepped because it was an interesting decision in how it was written. They felt like the decision was written more like a law than like a Supreme Court decision. And because it was written um, more as a statutory law, that the power to decide on abortion should be returned to the states, returned to um, each state, you voting for your politicians and those politicians passing laws on for your state, and each state can make their own decision. And so that is what the majority is saying. We don't need, they're saying, we don't, it's not really the Supreme Court's decision to make one decision when it comes to abortion for the entire United States. That is not a constitutional right. It's not explicitly in the Constitution, and it's not a substantial due process right. So a substantive due process right. So therefore, each state can decide for itself, and that's the majority's argument.
So let me ask you this. It it looks to me then, if we, because this is not the first time cases have passed either the state congressional committee or the federal congressional committee, and cases have gone straight to the Supreme Court before they have had their time either statewide or federal wise. Are we seeing, in your opinion then, the Supreme Court become more politicized than it was originally set up to be? Because I always thought the Supreme Court was kind of like, okay, like we do anybody in leadership. Okay, you got an issue on the lower tiers, you go to your upline, you go to your upline, you go to your upline. So if it can't be resolved from the upline, then you bring it finally to top management, which in this case would be the Supreme Court. So are we at a point now where we're skipping certain political hot buttons, uplines, and saying we're going to bring that directly to the Supreme Court and let the Supreme Court make state decisions? If you understand what I'm asking.
No, it's not jumping any procedures because it's gone through the court system. So there's levels to our federal court process, with the Supreme Court being the highest, and so it's already been decided by different federal courts, and the federal court made a decision, and it was appealed, and then it was appealed to the Supreme Court. And I'm not sure if everybody knows, but the Supreme Court doesn't have to hear every decision that's appealed to it. Um, Supreme Court gets thousands of cases, and the justices select which cases they're actually going to hear and make a decision on. And so I think it is more political now. Um, we had one president make multiple appointees. And so I think that possibly those appointees were waiting for an opportunity to hear a case like this. And we're more than excited to select this case to be one of the ones that were decided. Um, the Supreme Court is always kind of political. Presidents appoint Supreme Court justices, and we know presidents have their political um, leanings, what parties they belong to, and especially with the, I don't want to say drama, but with all the unprecedented actions that Congress has taken lately, with like when President Obama was trying to appoint his Supreme Court justice,
Right.
and they decided not to have the vote. Um, and that allowed for the next president to have multiple appointees. Now we're seeing the after effects of that. We're seeing that now the Supreme Court has swung from, more liberal to more conservative. And now, because the makeup has changed, we might be seeing a different decisions being handed out than they would have 10 years ago.
And it's interesting. I don't know if you remember, but at the time I was passing Living Word when that election took place, and even on our radio show, in podcasts and messages, I would say this is not about a presidential election. It's about the courts. It's
Mm-hmm.
not about, so when you said, I'm not going to vote, okay, you're talking about the yin and the yang of office, but and what you just said is very good, and I think that we need to understand that when we face a presidential election, it's not just about Democrat or Republican nominee. It's about their ability to appoint members, as you just said, to the Supreme Court who can make decisions for the people or otherwise. And I'm glad you brought that out, because this says I get out and vote because it's bigger than just a man or woman. It's about, and you remember we kept saying this, whoever's appointed, and this happens to be one good example, and I'm sure there's a come up we'll talk about. They will affect us for the next 100 years. Their rulings could affect us for decades to go. Were there, other than the leak several weeks before Attorney, were there any signs, you in the attorney legal culture, so y'all talk like, ministers and all, were, did you have a feeling that before the leak that this would come, or this caught everybody before the leak totally by surprise?
I think it was a concern. It was a concern for a long time. When we had the congressional hearings they have before a Supreme Court could be appointed to the court, um, where Congress members are asking the um, the nominees about their political leanings, about how they feel about certain decisions. It was explicitly asked of Kavanaugh, of other appointees that our previous president appointed. What are your feelings on abortion? What are your feelings on Roe v. Wade? It was something that members of Congress were worried about. And that's why it was an explicit question that they asked. And it's interesting to say the least that, in a congressional hearing, you could say, oh, it's settled law. And then the first case you get before you that's on the topic, you overturn Roe v. Wade. So
So you
did you
kind of
really?
you kind of felt it may be coming. You kind of politically, legally felt, okay, I won't be surprised.
Felt like it was an issue, but so in the legal world, we have this term called stare decisis, which is what the majority goes through, and it spends a lot of time arguing about that, and the dissent brings it up, and it's basically about precedent that says this is settled law. We Once the Supreme Court issues a ruling, um, when cases follow up, you usually just add to or make distinctions. You don't overturn. It's very rare that decisions are overturned. And so when you think, well, with the application of stare decisis, they're really never going to overturn Roe v. Wade because we hold that in such high regard. And in the decision, the majority says, yes, it's very important, but it's 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 not a demand that has to be followed. We don't always have to follow stare decisis, and of course they bring up Brown versus Board and a couple of other cases where the Supreme Court has overturned other decisions. but it's rare. So it was, when there were these congressional hearings for the appointees, it's a concern, but you think in the back of your head, well, I have some peace of mind because it's already been decided, and they really wouldn't overturn something completely important like Roe v. Wade. They might add some restrictions, they might fine tune it a bit, but a complete overturn of Roe v. Wade, I don't think people really saw
Yeah,
coming.
I was shocked. The first time I heard was the leak, and I was like, well, even with the leak, I don't think I. Be, and again, I'm not in the legal culture like you. I just never legally saw a complete overturn. I knew it was the desire of some of the conservative states to do for years. Even in some churches, I know that that's been a push, but I never dreamed that it would actually go to the Supreme Court and it would be overturned. So, and I'll get to this before we end. I don't intuitively, I don't think this fight is over. I something in me from a intuitive, and you may know intuitive and legal, but I'm not sure that this ruling is going to stay in place. And I want to talk to you before we end about that because that's very that's very high on my spiritual antenna that I don't think. Let me read something and give me your thoughts on this. As you know, Supreme Court Alito was very what's the word? He wrote the opinion for the case. Many pages. I think you mentioned the page before we came on. It was what?
It's over 200
Over
pages, is the
200, over
decision.
200 pages. Bless you, attorneys. That, you know, that's, y'all get to read the fine print, right? Y'all get to read. That's what I say. Let me turn this over to my attorney. But, so, and as you mentioned, John Roberts calls the decision a serious jolt in the legal system. And he goes on to quote that both the majority and dissent displayed a relentless freedom from doubt on the legal issues that I cannot share. What do you believe? Because even coming from John Roberts, if you understand how the Supreme Court is stacked, when he says a serious jolt to the legal system, which kind of indicated to me that he was totally against it. So, in a case like that, when you have such variety of split opinions, I know there are always split opinions, but it seems like these split opinions were severe split opinions. What do you think the, in your opinion, what do you think the future of the court moving forward looks like? Has any integral, unified, has any, in your opinion, damage been done to the court because of these such diverse opinions about this ruling?
This is an opinion where this is a decision where everybody kind of wanted to add their 2 cents. Sometimes you just get the majority's um, opinion, and the dissenting judges get together and they just write one dissent. But like you said, Chief Justice Roberts, he wrote his own concurring opinion. Justice uh, Supreme Court Justice Thomas wrote his concurring opinion, and then we had the dissent. Um, I think that it's not the first time
Okay.
where um, justices have been splintered on a decision, but they somehow find enough in common to make a ruling. Uh, and so they, we were able to get 5 justices who found enough in common to say this is the decision. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with Chief Justice Roberts, his concurrence that he agreed in judgment only. So he said he
Yes.
agreed with
Yes.
the final outcome, but the reasoning I don't quite,
Right, right. The
say,
final outcome,
I
yes,
don't quite,
yes.
you know, believe in the reasoning that was stated, but I believe that the outcome is
Yeah,
correct.
thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely, yes. I think that's
Right.
very,
So,
very important. That's very. But I was just looking at his hard language about a jolt, and and again, he had his reasoning. Talk a little bit about because I'm just getting educated because within this case, I keep hearing, I don't know whether this is precedent or not, but I keep hearing Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Can you help us to understand how that may apply to this particular case, Roe versus Wade?
so Roe versus Wade was decided in the 70s, and so that gave the established the right to abortion. It was through a right to privacy, is how the court established a right to abortion, because our Constitution doesn't explicitly say there's a right to abortion.
Okay.
It's not, one of our constitutional amendments. So the court had to establish the right of abortion through other rights. And so the Roe versus Wade combined some amendments, the rights in certain amendments together to say there was a right to privacy. And then Casey came along years later and it fine tuned the Roe v. Wade decision. It was also on abortion, and it was on what restrictions can states put on a woman's right to an abortion. Roe v. Wade established that before a fetus is viable, that a woman has a right to an abortion, and that the woman's interest supersedes the state's interest, so that she can terminate this pregnancy. And Casey establish what restrictions are okay and what restrictions are an undue burden. That's the test that Casey decided. What's the undue burden test? What's the undue burden that the state can't put on a woman? There were certain restrictions in Casey. I think about, like, if minors of a certain age had to have parental consent,
Hmm.
spousal consent. What are these okay? Are they not okay?
Hmm.
And so that is Casey added some more depth to Roe v. Wade, and decided what restrictions are okay and what's not, and what's the test to apply that. And so when you look at what the Supreme Court is overturning, when it's overturning Roe v. Wade, it's also overturning Casey by
Okay.
saying, right, they overturned Roe v. Wade and Casey, and they're saying that the state's interest doesn't doesn't begin really after a fetus is viable, and that what restrictions the state can put on should be decided by each state and not by the Supreme Court.
Wow.
That as they say, women, they have the right to vote. So if they want to not have certain restrictions imposed on them, to vote to elect their own politicians who will pass laws that they believe in with the restrictions that they do or do not want. And that's the when you say it's no longer a constitutional right, which is what the court is saying,
Hmm.
that the justices in Roe v. Wade were wrong to say it was a constitutional right, and Casey was wrong to bend backwards to try to defend Roe v. Wade. That it's not a constitutional right. So if it's different from state to state, that's fine, and that's how it should be, is what the majority is arguing. And it's scary because when we have other constitutional rights, we want to make sure that they're protected regardless of what state you're in. You know,
Wow.
when we're talking about discrimination on the basis of sex, on the basis of race, things like that, we want to make sure that you know it's not differing from state to state. But in this case, the court has decided in 2022 that it's okay if your rights are different from state to state when it comes to abortion.
Turner, you dropping some jewels. I mean, I'm sure those of you that are viewing are like me. You're just sitting there with your mouth open, getting educated as Attorney Cherice Flowers unravels this whole overturning of Roe versus Wade to make it make sense. for those of us who ain't in the legal field. Talk about the difference, because in reading up on this, I kept seeing the word, it's banded in Texas. What's the difference between abortion being banned, and abortion being illegal? Is there a difference?
No, I can't say that I've ever studied the difference between it being banned and abortion being illegal.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
I've never studied that terminology
I
difference.
was just wondering because
But
in some of the information I was reading, it says it kept using the word banded, like abortion has been banned in certain states, and I didn't know whether that was the same as saying it's illegal,
well,
or aspects like after a
right,
certain amount of time, maybe. I mean,
yeah. So a lot of states passed laws that they knew were in violation of Roe v. Wade.
oh, really?
They knew the law was in violation of Roe v. Wade. This this the Supreme Court case that we're talking about, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, because Roe v. Wade set up a trimester system that was like before the fetus is viable. I think at the time that Roe v. Wade was passed, and like it was about 28 weeks when the fetus becomes viable, and if the woman gave birth at 28 weeks, it's possible that the child would survive. So it was saying, abortion before that time, it's a woman's decision. After that time, the state can impose certain restrictions. And um, this case overturned. Roe Whippy had passed a law that says a woman couldn't get an abortion past 15 weeks. And certain states had even stricter laws on hand. 8 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. I think Texas had one that was really short. It was either like 6 or 8 weeks, which they knew was a violation of the Supreme Court's current ruling. But they passed them so that if there was ever a possibility for Roe v. Wade to be overturned, their laws would automatically go into effect.
Wow.
So it was like, this is our backup plan. If we ever get Roe v. Wade overturned, our laws are already going to be able to go into effect. We already have them on the books. Um, and so, in Mississippi, the case had gone through the court system, and the lower courts had, stopped it from being implemented, saying this is against um, the Supreme Court's decision. But now that it's reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has now decided that they're overturning Roe v. Wade, now the law can move forward and be imposed. So that's the scary thing, is that in certain states, you didn't have to wait for um, state legislators to decide, oh, they overturned Roe v. Wade, let's pass a new law. No, they already had something on the books to automatically spring into effect.
Wow. You dropping jewels. Yes. We have to get you back. Our time is almost up. Whew. That's why I'm asking you all to like this, to share this with persons. If you've had deep debates about the overturning of Roe versus Wade, many of your questions and resolutions can be resolved through this podcast, and y'all can become friends again as a result of listening to this podcast. My final question, attorney, is this, and I would like your opinion on this, because this has been the outcry or the offshoot of this decision. And I'm going to read you a quote. And it is by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas said that the legal rationale for Friday's decision could be applied to overturn other major cases, including those that legalize gay marriage, barred the criminalization of consensual homosexual conduct, and protected the rights of married people to have access to contraception. And of course, we know that there are other like voting rights and other rights. My closing question for this part one of this is, has this decision, in your opinion, opened up a Pandora box where it may become easier to overcome other constitutional rights or decisions, whatever we want to call them, simply by this probably being the landmark decision? Are the rights of Americans in their future, is it safe? Or give me your thoughts on this, because this has been the talk when this first happened. This was the talk, like, all right, now they're coming for this. But Alito says, and I didn't read that, he says, what I'm writing only pertains to abortion. So in other words, he was saying, I know y'all tripping about your other rights, but if you look at the opinion, he says those rights are not included. But then Clarence Thomas comes by and say, well, maybe we do need to consider. Let me hear you on that.
And, no one has a crystal ball, so we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do in the future. But I think that this decision does give us, a right to be concerned, to not feel at peace, to ratchet up our advocacy, to ratchet up our protests, and being hard on our state representatives on what decisions they make, because it gives you the feeling that maybe nothing is safe. I will say, yeah, the majority, they explicitly say this is only about abortion, and because it involves I think the language they used was potential life. It involves a
Yes.
potential life, and so
Yes.
none of those other laws involve a potential life. None of those other rights involve a potential life. So don't worry about it. We're just sticking to this reasoning. But Clarence Thomas, he comes along and he has a very technical viewpoint on why he feels like those other rights might be, um, those other rights could be overturned. He talks about substantive due process and how he's been saying for years and years that that doesn't exist. But even if we don't go along with his technical viewpoint, the dissenting judges who disagreed with the majority, they also say we should be concerned, because part of the basis that the Supreme Court decided that Roe v. Wade was wrong and should be overturned was because, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
was because they said at the time it was decided, this right wasn't grounded historically. Historically, um, 26 states at the time that Roe v. Wade was decided, 26 states had laws against abortion. That this isn't a right that's entrenched in American society, and so therefore
Excuse me.
they they decided that since it wasn't really entrenched historically and socially, it could be overturned. And the dissent says, well, let's think about other rights, the right to gay marriage, or the right to contraception. Those aren't really historically entrenched in our society either. So if the Supreme Court can use that reasoning for this right, why can't they use that reasoning for other rights?
Now I have a question. We know that precedent is very strong in legal cases. So do you ever, and I know we don't know, but could this case ever be used to overturn some of those issues as precedent, you think?
I mean, this case is precedent now, so it will be interesting to see how the Supreme Court moves forward, and how lower courts are going to interpret this case, because that's one effect of when the Supreme Court makes a decision, they issue the ruling, and then when subsequent cases come before lower courts, they have to interpret what the Supreme Court meant and apply it. How will lower courts apply this? Will lower courts start to apply this to other areas outside of abortion, leading for this matter to go back to the Supreme Court again? So it's really wait and see on what will happen, but
So, just for clarity, where we are now, and please correct me. So, this in June, Roe versus Wade was overturned, and so it's now not a constitutional right for states to grant abortion. So, at this point, has the Supreme Court basically said we're handing this decision to the states, and it's up to the states if they want to grant abortions or make them illegal? Is that, am I understanding it correct? Is that where we
right.
are?
Yes, that's what the majority is saying.
Okay.
We They said we give the power back to the states. We give the power back to the people who elect their representatives, and we are letting the states decide on a state by state basis when abortion is acceptable, when um, how many weeks, if there's any exceptions, and the uh, justices in the dissent are very concerned about that because they said the majority is giving the power back to the states without any restrictions. They didn't say there had to be a restriction on rape or incest or anything like that. They said the states have complete control to decide what are the restrictions or what impediments that they can put on a woman's access to an abortion.
Wow, this is a case to follow, as you said. I think we'll be talking about this and its effect for many years. And just for those of you who are wondering, yes, we are Christians. I am a minister, but we were not approaching this from a spiritual perspective. We wanted to approach this because I know this is a very hot button when it comes to spirituality. Your opinion. So, whatever side you stand on, the facts of this case are still the facts. And that's why we brought our attorney on to discuss the legal ramifications. Now, there are plenty of stations you can go on to hear the spiritual part, but we said we wanted to know the legal ramifications of this worldwide shaking, overturning vote on Friday, June the 24th, 2022, which will, I believe, attorney, go down in infamy, in history. Forever, your children and your children's children will remember that. Now, having said that, and I keep saying I'm gonna wrap up, but this rabbit hole is so wide and so deep. I have one more. You know, you can never trust us when we say I'm almost finished. Because but so let's talk about this because this has been on my mind. What, if at all, what would it take, or I don't even know if it's ever been done, to overturn the decision of the Supreme Court? Has that ever been done? Could it happen? And if so, what would it take?
To overturn the Supreme Court's decision,
Yes.
you don't really overturn it. We have checks and
I mean, for
balances.
them to go back
Hmm.
and have the pressure to reconsider, like somebody appeal. So, is there such thing? Can you appeal a decision of the Supreme Court or not?
No, once the Supreme Court decides it,
That's it.
that's the law of the land.
Okay.
Now, as the Supreme Court changes, because justices are appointed, justices um, retire, hopefully, um, because they can serve for life if they want, and we have had justices
And I think
die
we need to,
die
in my
on the bench.
opinion, revisit that. But that's a whole nother. I think it's dangerous when you don't have term limits for anybody. But anyway, go ahead. Go ahead and term.
Right. So we don't know how long the justices that decided this decision are going to, hold their positions. Unfortunately, they're all quite young, you know. So due to how young they are, they could be on the Supreme Court for a long time. So I really don't see the Supreme Court overturning their decision when it's still the same people.
Okay.
Um, it's different if, three or four people who are on today, 5 years from now, they're not on. And then we have a different makeup that might come to different conclusions. But, Congress can decide to pass laws. Congress can decide that they're going to come together and pass a federal law that will apply to all the states. And that is the option of Congress. And I believe that there is a lot of voicing for Congress to do that. With our Congress currently split the way it is, I don't have high hopes that that's ever going to happen anytime soon, because they can't pass things that aren't a hot topic. So I really don't see Congress working together to pass a law that's on such a hot topic and divisive topic as abortion. But Congress could if they wanted to.
You don't think even if the Democrats win back both the House and the Senate in November, that there would be some initiative to put such a law? I know they won't get the support from the Republican side of the aisle, but do you believe it's a chance if the Dems win House and Senate that it may be some stirring in that area, perhaps?
If the Democrats are able to win the House and the Senate, and I'm not you know, I don't keep up 100% on that, but I know the odds aren't high for that. But it's possible that the Democrats could win back both the House and the Senate. Um, then yeah, they could pass a law. That's what happened with the Affordable Care Act. They had the slightest majority, and they pushed it through
Pushed
while
it through.
while they
It
had
was what was it, last month? I mean, just
they
barely
pushed it
got it.
through at the last minute. They had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they said we're going to get it through while we can get it through. And
Yeah.
so they could do something like with the Affordable Care Act and just power it through while they still have the majority. Um, so we'll see things are after midterms.
And I believe this again from an intuitive position that, as you so very well put it, that the power is going back to the people. So it wouldn't surprise me. I would be less surprised if it's at some point a that Congress in votes to kind of overturn that. I would be less surprised than I was when it was overturned initially, because as you rightfully said, I believe this is not going to die down. I don't believe we've finished seeing the pushback, the demonstrations. The news media is not covering it, but as you and I know, people are protesting somewhere in this country and in other countries, believe it or not,
Yes.
every single day. And I believe that there's a pot brewing, and as we get closer to midterms, we're going to see a little more steam with an attempt to put pressure on Congress to do something. And that's why you have to watch this podcast, because now we know what it would take to overturn this. Attorney Cherice Flowers, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for taking your precious time with child, with responsibilities, husband, job, etc., to come on to this podcast, Wake Up Now, to help us make sense out of something that I believe will go down in the annals of history. So I want to have you back. I believe we're in the time where, because laws are changing, and it's kind of like any field. I don't fix cars because I'm not a mechanic. Somebody else doesn't minister because maybe that's not their area. We have our areas. But I believe like never before, we need conscious, aware attorneys of color to help us interpret the law so that we know what we need to do to position ourselves, our families, and our communities. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And once you're with child, we're going to have you back to talk about your birth experience. No, to talk about your advocacy endeavors, because that's my heart, as you know, community and helping those who cannot necessarily help themselves. So any closing remarks, and of course, give your email address in case somebody fast forwarded and didn't listen to our introduction. And just to let you know, go to our website when you get a chance, those of you that are viewing, If you follow us, you'll get a notice. We'll play clips of this and let you know when we upload the whole entire podcast. And it's going to be a blessing. Closing remarks, attorney?
This was an awesome discussion, and we could have gone in a million different ways, so we didn't have time for everything. But like you said, I don't think this is going to die down. We have to think about how this is going to affect um, people in our community who don't have the financial means, because if you're in a state like Texas where you can drive for 10 hours and still be in Texas,
Yep.
and Texas says you can't get an abortion, um, how are you going to get access to a different state? Sometimes I feel like we're privileged in the DMV area because we
Yes.
can switch states very quickly. But for other people, if they don't have the financial means to have a car and book a hotel and everything, this could be very detrimental. And I'm not a doctor. I wish, we could have a medical opinion on here about how this could
Which is
affect
okay. Yeah.
um, you know, women who terminate pregnancies for different medical reasons, and having doctors, because in certain states, they've passed laws saying that doctors can be prosecuted for giving abortions. And so, how is this impacting the medical profession? And can a woman, even when she falls into a category, find a doctor that's willing to help her? So it's so many implications that this decision is going to have on our community, and um, and on the nation as a whole. And I just am keeping an eye out, keeping an ear out to see, how everything unfolds. But thank you so much for having me on here. It's been a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed the research I did on this topic and being able to discuss it with you. And I hope that everybody gets something from it.
And I have, as the host, believe it. There are very few topics where I have to just like, I have no clue. But this was a topic, legal topic, where I had no clue. It was my privilege. It was my honor. You said you have how long before your child?
Less than 5 weeks before my due date. So
And
we're on the countdown.
we know that it'll be very blessed process, and that God's grace accompanies you with that. And I cannot wait to hear the great news and to get the pictures sent. And
Oh, no.
once you recover well, we want to definitely sometime first of next year, if not sooner, you let me know to have you back, because we're in very changing times. And as we say, information is definitely power. And attorneys, believe it or not, are some of the most powerful people because even the laws that Congress write, there are attorneys that put the language in and help
Yes.
them. So you are one of the most powerful people on the planet that help shape our destiny. Attorney, thank you. God bless you. And I know all will be blessed like I was who view this.
Thank you.
Blessings.